Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Socializing Security. We're coming off of a exciting experience for the first time since starting the podcast, where Brian and I actually got to see each other in person since starting the podcast.
Yeah, it was kind of wild.
To illuminate the audience, we used to work together, so this is not the first time that we've actually met in person. We have had I would still say we're remote friends, though, for the most part. I think we've spent a couple dinners together and a couple meetings, but we haven't spent much time together, like one-on-one.
And we've spent time together since we didn't work together. That has happened, but it was in a group context in that regard. But yeah, it was awesome to be able to just be friends together, to do whatever we wanted to do. Like, we weren't driven by anything other than the schedules of what we had to do at the conference. So that was really awesome. And of course, anytime you're at a conference, the evening time is usually pretty free forms. That was cool.
Actually, it was nice to have. I really enjoyed going to the conference because we were at HIMSS, the Health Information Management Systems Security Conference, I think is what it stands for.
Some combination of those words.
And it was in Vegas, and I was invited on a whim, pretty much thanks to Brian. So was very grateful for that invitation, and also had such a fun week. So it worked out really well. The timing, I think, for me was perfect, and I think it was super cool to also get to see Brian do his thing where he works and be like the biggest cheerleader ever. So that was really fun.
That was very awkward for me, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. Literally biggest cheerleader.
But I'm like a hype woman. I do that for all friends, family. Like I'm the person to invite to like a wedding or whatever. Like I'm like to be a good time for people. I like to show up for the people that I care about. And it was super cool getting to watch you like demonstrate what you've been spending so much of your time doing. Obviously we work for a living, so we do this for fun. It was really cool getting to see you just showcase your work and be a super fan. I mean, I would say I'm a super fan for most of my like great friends, and you are one of those for me. So it was really cool to get to watch you do your thing. Also, we got you got better traction, you got like, because people were like, who is that?
Yeah, I mean, in my role, it's sometimes the hardest thing is people getting to know you and trust you. And as I like to go out and talk to customers and be in front of audiences to present on things, being live with people and being able to have random people walk up at a booth and say, hey, what is it that you do? And being able to tag team with people that do that more often, and them seeing, oh, this guy in marketing actually knows his stuff and can hold down one of these conversations.
This guy in marketing.
I mean,
just like not how I would describe you at all, but I'm surprised to hear
the title.
You say that.
Well, I mean, I'm very thoughtful about what other people see, and a lot of people see this person has marketing in their title, therefore they can't be technical, even if technical is also in their title, and that can be true. There are definitely tech marketing people that come from the marketing side, not from the technical side. So I'm always thoughtful about the fact I need to prove myself to sales engineers and technical people. And I have a long history of being able to do that. And so I know I can do it. It's just the at-bat sometimes is at a conference in front of them.
Yeah, I don't love that we have this in common, because I always have to do this to prove that I'm technical when I have a regulatory background. So because I'm a lawyer by training, people don't assume that I understand what like technical security topics are.
Yeah, and that's fine. It sucks that we have to do that, but I understand why we have to do those things. And so I'm used to it. Like, I'm not afraid to prove myself in those situations. And if I'm in a situation where I know I can't, then I'm going to be upfront about that and be like, yeah, I don't know that piece, but I can answer this piece.
That's what makes you good at your job.
I mean, if you're not honest about your failings, I don't mind the, interview question of what's your greatest weakness.
Oh, really?
Because
I struggle with that one because I'm like, come up with a more creative question.
And that's part of it is it's an opportunity to be creative, and it's an opportunity to show how weaknesses can be turned into strengths. And that's how I always view that question. But anyway, we were going to talk about healthcare and a conference.
Okay. I'll bring it back. So one, super cool to get to see Brian do his thing at HIMSS, and also really fun to just have the opportunity to talk about socializing security with healthcare professionals, because that was really that's really who was there. It was a lot of IT, cyber, legal, some compliance. I'm not sure I met many, but I did meet a couple, and then mainly healthcare. So it was doctors, medical professionals, PhD students, researchers who are exploring different health information management systems, learning more about different types of security solutions or different softwares that they might be able to use in their day-to-day, whether that's, a private practice or a large hospital system. That's really who was there. And so it was cool because that was probably the first like really healthcare specific conference I've been to. And so I was having some really interesting conversations with chief medical directors and some really cool strategists and people that were there doing like fractional work. And I think it kicked off one of the conversations for me was, and this is really what we're hoping to talk about today, was somebody that I was chatting with on like the show floor, right? It was one of the largest conferences I think that I'll ever go to. It was huge. But I
It
was
is one of the biggest.
yeah, it was 30,000 people, I think, if not more than that.
Something
It
like
was
that.
massive. It was in three large casinos. I didn't even make it to one of the casinos that had like spaces. I didn't make it to one of them. My feet were exhausted, but I digress. Um, but I will say I was having a conversation and they were like, oh, like, what do you do? And of course, I was just talking about compliance counsel, and then also socializing security came up, and we were talking about the podcast and kind of like what we're trying to do. And they were like, oh, wait, how can I follow? Like, what can I do to subscribe? Because suddenly they were like, oh, we don't know anything about cybersecurity stuff or like IT topics for us because we're so focused in the like medical healthcare space. Like, we have IT security and compliance, but like they're not really a part of what we do. Yeah, like I don't know if like I'll kick that off, but what is the initial feedback on that?
Yeah, I mean, for those that aren't familiar with HIMSS, it's a very interesting conference, especially for those of you who, like me, have really just been going to IT conferences, and it's all been about, IT infrastructure slash security, or more of the app dev side of things. HIMSS is a very different approach. It really is about medical technology, and so you will have a booth that is, a cybersecurity company next to a company that does the cows or the computer on wheels. So anytime you've been in a hospital and they wheel in that little cart that has a laptop on it and a bunch of things attached to it, there were several vendors there that had just different examples of those carts. None of the technology aspects of it, just what goes on that cart or what is that cart. And then the booth next to them may be a health information technology. EMR, EHR is the terminology that we use in the space. That, when you look at, when they sit down in front of the computer and they open up an application and look at, all the notes and stuff, it's that application on the back end. And there's a lot of examples of those. So it's a very wide range. And to Milu's point, there's everybody from the lowest level IT tech people that have no concept of what the doctors are actually doing, all the way up to CISOs at the event, and over into the chief medical officers and the true MDs and nurses and stuff that will be there. And so you end up with a very wide range of people that are there. And it's a little disconcerting to those of us that are used to just everybody there knows technology. And, at my booth, I couldn't go deep. Oftentimes the conversations would be, okay, yeah, I see the importance of that, but that's not my decision. Like, I don't understand. I'm not going to be able to understand any further. Let me send over my CIO or my CISO or my director of technology, whoever that might be, to come over and have that conversation, because I see the importance. And that's part of, it's an interesting, for somebody in marketing, like the message that I tell has to be very different than it would be at a Microsoft conference or an AWS conference.
100%, and I agree with you completely, because I ended up talking more about the podcast than what I do as like a fractional like compliance officer or like a CISO, because I was realizing that they were like, what do you do? And I was like, oh yeah, cybersecurity privacy lawyer. And then it was suddenly like,
Glazed
okay,
eyes.
like, yeah, like I think, that sounds scary, which is so funny because I had somebody literally tell me that specifically. And that's what I was trying to get to earlier, where I was just like, they were like, cybersecurity, like terrifying. No, like know that it's important, but like like that individual was in marketing, and so like I was like, oh, okay, like interesting, and then we kind of like dove into it. But you know what, I think they were in sales, so maybe it was a little bit different. But and I'm not trying to call anybody out. I had an amazing conversation with that individual, and I hope that they are now a subscriber to Socializing Security, because that was really what I suddenly, like, I was passing out more of our stickers and talking about the podcast, because I was realizing they were like, oh wow, that's so cool. Like they would ask me what I do, right? And I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm a cybersecurity and privacy lawyer, like I consult and I do fractional work. And they were like, amazing, wow, like I don't know anything about that. And I was like, well, great. If you want to learn a little bit about it, I have a podcast. And then I was pitching the podcast, and they were like, oh my gosh, like this is incredible. Like I need this. There's a niche in the market here for us, because like we want to learn more. But you know, I joined like the meetings with the chief technical like CTO, the chief technology officer, or like our technical team members, and they're talking at a level that like I just don't understand. And they're like, I'm an MD, and
Yeah.
I'm a doctor, and I am incredibly intelligent. I'm speaking for these individuals, but I would believe that if they made it through med school and all that. Nursing school too, I spoke to so many incredible nurses, and all of them were like, yeah, we know that it's really important, and like we see some of it in our day to day, but like we don't understand like some of the technology or like what they're talking about. And I was like, cool, you should maybe subscribe to our podcast. So I was
Yeah.
like, maybe just like check us out on YouTube. And it was cool to have that as like something to talk about, because I was realizing that I was like, oh, there's a need for this.
Yeah, and I think everybody, with all the ransomware events that have been happening against hospitals in the last 5 or 6 years, oddly, that was a space, that was one area where everybody agreed we will not attack hospitals. And then one day that completely flipped on its head, and they became one of the highest targets. And so pretty much everybody in healthcare, like everybody's heard ransomware. That's not really a super technical term anymore. It's something a lot of people at least grok that is something that's happening out there. Many of them have probably experienced it at this point in the work in the healthcare space, and seen, oh, well, I can't get to that electronic medical records application anymore because apparently there was a ransomware. I don't know what ransomware means. I just know that it's a thing that can shut down my main application and cause me a lot of pain in my day-to-day job. And so we've always said, one of our main things is to have kind of those basic conversations, like what is ransomware, and why does it happen? What are they doing with it? How can I, as a nurse on the floor of a hospital, how is it going to affect me? What can I do about it? Those are the conversations we definitely want to have. So I'm glad you had a lot of those types of conversations.
Okay, just while it's fresh and we're having the conversation, I did a quick Google search for the listeners that are joining us in the conversation, because let's just pull the NIST definition of, and I'm saying NIST, N-I-S-T. That's one of my favorite glossary resources that I use in my professional life. It's just like kind of a good baseline. But what is quote unquote ransomware? So according to the NIST definition, ransomware is a type of malicious attack where attackers encrypt an organization's data and demand payment to restore access. And then it does give some examples, so I'll just read those quickly just because I want to make sure we're all having the same conversations with our listeners. So here's an example of how a ransomware attack can occur. So 1, a user is tricked into clicking on a malicious link that downloads a file from an external website. 2, the user executes the file not knowing that the file is ransomware. 3, the ransomware takes advantage of vulnerabilities in the user's computer and other computers to propagate throughout the organization. And then 4, the ransomware simultaneously encrypts files on all the computers, then displays messages on their screens demanding payment in exchange for decrypting files. And so again, that is the definition that I'm reading off of nist.gov, which is a US resource mainly, but is a good one to use as a glossary. I would definitely also look at some of like ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK is an excellent resource as well for glossaries for this type of cybersecurity information. And then my personal favorite is the one in Australia, actually. So my go-to glossary is usually the IRAP, which is the Information Assessors Program in Australia. That's my like gold star glossary for terms, for cybersecurity terms, just in the mindfulness of giving some education here as we're talking about it.
No, that's great.
That's my
That's
little
great.
ransomware blurb. So just so we're clear, it's a type of malicious attackers where attackers encrypt an organization's data and then demand payment. There are many other words for it, but it's basically you've had a really bad data breach and your data is being held ransom for money by a cyber.
Yep. And I think we'll do a episode focused specifically on ransomware and how, what it is, what the goal is, who's doing it, and what individuals can do to help prevent it. You kind of touched on it in the concept of you'll get an email that looks weird and you'll click on it. And that's why most of us have probably seen our security teams testing us. They'll send
text too.
Yeah. I mean, it comes through email, it comes through text, it comes through QR codes, it comes through
Anything.
anything
Any
that
potential
communicates.
weakness in the system, which is why it's so
Yeah.
scary.
It's even happening through messaging apps like Signal and iMessage and stuff like that nowadays too.
Signal too, yeah. Sadly.
Yeah. So we'll definitely talk more about that because that's a whole series of episodes in and of themselves. But yeah, thank you for that, Milu. That was a good primer on that. We'll make sure to include some links in the show notes for that kind of thing. So look for that if you want to dig a little bit deeper. But I am also a big fan of the NIST glossary.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to go back to what we were talking about just before I interrupted you with some education, you were diving into conversations you were having on the trade show floor with medical professionals at HIMSS and talking about what is ransomware.
Yeah, and so really what it kind of comes down to is a lot of people are aware of these cybersecurity topics. I think everybody's, for the most part, aware of the compliance needs too, because HIPAA has been so in our face over the last decade and a half or so. So we kind of, some element of...
on that?
Well, that compliance exists. I don't know that people necessarily understand HIPAA or other compliance measures like that, why they're important or what they're doing. And that's probably another whole topic in and of itself.
Cultural comment that I'll say right now, where one of my favorite TV shows is The Golden Girls. It's just like one of my all-time favorites. And I was recently watching like an old episode, and it was actually about HIPAA. And it was actually I think like season 5 or something, the showrunner really started to do some really cool like advocacy work in some of the shows that she was doing in the episodes. But it was from 1989, and there's a very iconic scene in it where the doctor is like, well, I can't say this because of HIPAA, but I can't tell you who the celebrity is that's like next door. And I watched this literally the day I got back from HIMSS, and I was like, wow, okay, so in 1989 or so, or 87 when the show came out, this particular episode was, and I can link the episode in the show notes, but for the most part, it was very much about HIPAA, and it was about like a diagnosis issue for one of the characters. But it was cool to see it like coming off of like a week of just talking to healthcare professionals about HIPAA and high trust and high tech and all the like kind of like healthcare specific standards from the compliance framework of being like, wow, okay, so in the 80s we were talking about this publicly in TV. So like on like, and so you're 100% right. HIPAA's been around for a long time, and I do agree. I do think I have thoughts on like, I think we've gotten complacent and I think we need more, but that's a whole separate episode again right there, just of like that I'm like, yeah, HIPAA's great, but what else?
Yeah, and we've kind of put a little bit of a stake in the ground that at some point we'll do kind of a popular culture, how popular culture is dealing with the topics that we talk about on the podcast. I don't know exactly how we will do it. And we're figuring this out live as we record this, but I'm thinking this could be our first opportunity to do a live show where, maybe it's a movie of the month, maybe it's a episode of the week type of thing, but it could be a situation where we want to engage with all of you as listeners and fans of this show, if I can go that far as to call you fans.
I think we have fans. I think my mom is definitely a fan, so she's a fan.
So those fans amongst us, where we could talk about, old movies like Hackers, where it's all about cybersecurity and what's real, what wasn't real. Was it prescient in the way that a movie in the 90s applies to 20, almost 30 years later about what's going on today. And this is a great example of what I'm thinking of is this episode of Golden Girls where they were good. Talking about compliance and how can we help people to better understand it. Well, how it pops up in popular culture is a great way for us to start tying it together into what people who aren't doing cybersecurity every day or aren't doing compliance every day, how can they better understand based on how other people who don't understand it every day have put it into popular culture.
100%. This is tying into some of our more recent conversations about like our look back episodes and thinking about 2025 and what were going on. And it was that for me that I was like, wow, okay, this is really exceptional to see that this was being broadcasted live on cable in 89, and it was really important, and it's a phenomenal episode. Again, I do think context and timelines are really important when we're referencing like older publications and different materials of being
100%.
like, hey, like culture has changed. So again, there might be certain things that like on a show like Golden Girls that, you know, a joke might not be something I would be really proud of sticking my like name or brand to now, but I do think it's important for us to think back about being like, wow, okay, in 1989 we had showrunners who were posting and talking about HIPAA on like broadcast cable TV when that was like the main way that people were consuming television at the
Hmm.
time, right? Obviously, we had movie and cinema before then, but I think having some contexting around it, being like, hey, again, at Socializing Security, we love to like think about different ways for us to socialize healthcare, IT compliance. And one of the things we get asked very often is how do we make it land for our neighbors, for our parents, for our friends who are not really into cyber, who hear cybersecurity and are like glaze over, right? We just said that. And I have that very often that I meet certain people that are like I'm not interested in what you do because it scares me. And that's super fair, but I think when we start to give tangible examples of what IT security compliance means for every single one of us in our personal lives, having relevant pop culture moments to refer to can
Yes.
be really, really powerful to help our listeners understand, like, hey, if you're getting a question about cybersecurity and you're not sure specifically HIPAA, look back at the episode. Again, maybe just focus on certain portions of the episode. You can send somebody a quick link, but it's also like how do you create culture internally within an organization of like if you're in the middle of a HIPAA audit, sending that short potentially of Dorothy exclaiming with her doctor that like she doesn't care which celebrity is next door because she's dealing with a health crisis could actually be really powerful for you to create culture within your internal org. And it's something that's like completely different than just being like, I'm in the middle of a HIPAA audit.
Well, just imagine having to do your annual compliance training and being able to watch Golden Girls instead of those really, I don't want to say poorly produced because they're usually well produced, but they're maybe not well acted or well written
I've
skits.
seen some. There are some that exist in the
Oh, yeah.
marketplace that are good. We
Yeah.
we actually interviewed somebody on our podcast that's really good at this thing, I think,
Yes.
potentially. But look back at another episode, we have somebody who's an exceptional, talented resource for psychological training.
Yeah.
That's not the right word. The training of and psychology of training. And we'll drop that episode in the show notes as well.
Education. Yeah, and that's what I want to drive with this potential series of episodes that I think we can do, which is let's make it something that maybe people have already watched before, maybe something that people would be like a movie in the 90s about hacking, like was hacking even going on back then? What did they think about that? To me is really interesting, and I love going back and to your point, putting it into context of what was going on then and how much of it applies today, how much of it is cringe today, helps us to understand the culture in which it was produced and released. That can actually be very insightful as to what's really meaningful today.
Yeah. Bringing it back to HIMSS and some of the conversations we were having, one of the most valuable conversations that I had was with the technology company that is their label printers. So as you had said, right, like it could
Mm-hmm.
be really impressive cybersecurity software that's like really complex. And then it was also like literally like power cables or then like the best mouse or like waterproof keyboards that I
Yep.
saw that I was like, I need that because I'm a spill risk. I spill my stuff all the time. And I know it was meant for like hospitals that like there's like a lot of different moving parts and I was like, wow, I could probably get a waterproof keyboard. That actually might make my day-to-day life less stressful. One of them was a company that's just like printing QR codes and it's turned into this whole conversation about IT and cybersecurity risk because this is something that I've advised clients on before where they were printing out QR codes for an event locally at an event and the label that they were using, the label maker, basically like the ink was too good and so the ink was going through not only on the actual label but also the back, like the discard part of the printer
Yep.
label. And it actually turned into an issue where somebody was basically able to like take one of those things and get into the event. And so suddenly that's what we call a data breach, right? That suddenly we've had actually like it was just a breach, like a physical security breach at that point, not even necessarily a data breach, but we had a breach because somebody was in the event that wasn't supposed to, and because they took a discard label and they were able to scan a QR code to get in, because honestly the printer ink was too good, and it turned into a very like interesting conversation with the IT organization at the time to figuring out how do we make sure that we get the right label maker that won't the ink won't bleed. And so I
Yep.
was talking to this particular vendor who this is their sweet spot. They literally only and they specialize in healthcare because this like PHI, the personal health information that might be on the wristbands or any of the labels that you might have when you're sick at the doctor, they don't want your PHI ending up in the trash can. Because then they
Yep.
were like, yeah, then we have to have shredder bins around, and like and I was like, oh my god, I've had the same thing. And so it was a cool moment where we could like connect on a very different way. And again, I hope they're listening today. I think they subscribed as we were standing there, but it was just really cool to get to see and have that type of experience with them. And again, thinking through some of those moments in time for pop culture references, I think is also excellent for some of our super technical listeners who are really focused on technology and focus on they do their work remotely and they work on their computer, and they've thought about all of the security aspects within their home work environment, don't necessarily get to go with marketing to these events,
Yeah.
and don't necessarily see that there might be a huge like security risk with just a label maker.
Yeah, and those are the things that are really interesting to me is like data breaches seem obvious. Like somebody breaks into the computer and they get all that data. I mean, that's a data breach, right? Well, yes and no. Like that's the easiest one to comprehend for most people, I think, but the weird edge cases, and this is one of the reasons why I've loved healthcare. I used to work for a health insurance company as my second job in this field, and had to think through some of these things as I was developing websites and stuff like that back in the day. Was what are the edge cases? The edge cases are where security happens. Quite frankly, it's the edge case that provides a way in. It's the hey, I found this USB drive laying in the parking lot. How do you stop people from sticking that into a computer? Because it's maybe somebody dropped it, but it may be somebody dropped it on purpose so that you would pick it up and plug it into your computer. And, things like, and I've definitely seen these in lots of different scenarios, but things like the ink is going to bleed into something we normally just throw in the regular trash, and the regular trash is a cyber espionage target. Like people that are doing cyber espionage sometimes have to, just like if you want to get into somebody's computer system, sometimes you got to break into their building. If I wait for them to dump the trash in the dumpster and I can get to, and we've seen this in popular culture too, like
Yeah, like Ocean's 11 too. Like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking
there's
of
so
all
many
the
examples.
movies.
So many examples of them grabbing the trash. You jump in the trash and you pull out the bags and you open it up and you start digging through everything that's in there, and people going and taking all the shredded pieces and trying to tape them back together so they can figure something out. Like
I'd
those are
like to do a viewing of Ocean's 8.
that's on my list.
Okay, great.
I found a
Sorry,
really
I cut you
really
off in the
long
middle, but I
list.
got really excited about the fact that we could
Nope.
do a
I
live
found a
viewing of
really
Ocean's
long
8.
list that is like supposedly all the movies that ever even touch on cybersecurity, and then maybe I recognized a third, probably less than half of them. Some of them are very explicitly titled as not explicit titles as in potty words, but very obvious that they are about cybersecurity. Some are very less obvious, and some of those I'm actually really attracted to that have nothing to do with what you would normally think of as a cybersecurity topic. And it may be that they, Ocean's 8 is sort of an example. All the Ocean's movies, like anytime they took advantage of technology to break into a vault or whatever it might be, they may not
Spy
be.
movie. Any spy movie.
Yes, because a lot of it comes down
Spy
to social
Kids could do
engineering.
it.
Wow. Okay. We'll talk about that one offline. But yeah, there's so many examples that were on that list that I'm like, huh. I mean,
Despicable
Jurassic Park
Me.
is one. Jurassic Park. Let's take
Despicable
one I
Me.
know really well.
Despicable.
Just that one too.
My dog is named Minion just for the crowd, just so you can have that little tidbit. Her name is Minion, so I love Despicable Me.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a series that I think will
The
be
podcast
very
now is
helpful.
just going to be that.
Like I said, I think this is our easy entry into a live stream where we can actually discuss this with all of you, which I think is the thing that is
Cool.
is super attractive to me. Is let's do a live
Yes.
stream, let's get a live chat. I don't know if we'll do a call in necessarily, but that is a possibility that we can consider. So,
Totally cool. As long as we have a VoIP, then I'm cool with it. As long as
it,
we have a private phone number that's not listed as spam. Because, man, I just got a new work phone number. And bless her heart, Elizabeth, who had this phone number, I don't know her, but my God, is she on every single list? So we are on the do not call list and we're trying to figure that out. But
yeah, good luck with
Elizabeth,
that.
I have your new phone number. And my gosh, I understand. I hope you gave it up just because you were just trying to drop off and start
Yeah,
over
all the
and
lists.
get a new phone number because man, I am getting at least 30 messages a day, I think,
Wow, that's not fun.
which makes me feel like I'm super popular and then I'm like literally it's just
It's the
spam.
wrong kind of popular.
So,
The
no,
very, very worst kind
it's
of
kind of my
popular.
worst nightmare. I want to bring it back to HIMSS as we round out the
Oh,
conversation
yeah, we were
today.
talking about hymns, weren't we?
Okay, I have a question for you for our audience. Would you invite me back to a conference with you as a friend to get to be your cheerleader?
Oh,
You
wow.
can say no.
That's a very uncomfortable question you posed to me.
I did that on
I'm
purpose because you said it was awkward.
Yeah, you knew what you were doing. So I'm going to answer it in the way that you expected me to answer it, which is I would never not invite you somewhere I was going, even though I am super uncomfortable with having a cheerleader in the audience.
I can tone it back next time. I don't want to, but I can.
No, I mean it's good to have somebody to hype up the audience because that is one of my presentation skills that I am probably least skilled at, which is being a hype person for an audience. I like to make it as interactive as possible. Unfortunately, some venues it's just not possible and it's a really large audience. You've got to ask a lot of generic clap if you type of questions. You can't really single people out. In a smaller venue, I can look at people and make them a little uncomfortable and try to force them to react at the very least. The venue I was in at HIMSS was a presenting on the show floor in a booth, which means that you've got random people walking by constantly. You've got more noise than I can handle usually.
There's a lot of
If we
noise, yeah.
if we want to talk about noise canceling earplugs, that is something that I could definitely talk about because I have experience with that. As somebody who does get overwhelmed with noise sometimes, and having to use a microphone in a small venue or a small audience is very uncomfortable for me too. So to
Yeah.
answer your
Do you
question, yes,
okay, I'll be invited back. Okay, cool.
yes, but tone it down,
Okay,
man.
fine. He'll just give me better boundaries. You know what it was just kind of fun because he didn't give me like we didn't have a really because I kind of showed up when you were like in it, so I was like, oh, I'm just gonna just like sit and not bother you because I also how
Yeah.
cool is it to get to see your friends do work? You like,
Oh
you know what I
yes.
mean? Like you never get to like bring your friend to work or like bring your co-host to work. So like I was super excited to be there, and I took way too many videos of him for his friends and family so that they could
My
also
phone was
experience it.
filled.
Literally, like I think his backups probably got the like, dude, like you had ran out of storage because I was just
The
recording
event
you.
marketing people appreciated it.
Oh, good. Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
See, I can wear that hat too for them. Um, no, but again, I think getting that type of content of like, I was like, it's exciting. Like, your family members might never get to see that part of you because conference passes are super expensive and they're gatekeep behind professionals for corporate. So like, you're not really like, like I don't really get to like bring my spouse to work day. And so it was cool because I would love to get a video of my husband doing his thing at some point, like in his job. And I actually am planning on probably bringing my parents with me to HIMSS next year. So that'll be a really fun thing for me as compliance counsel will be, I'm hopeful. I'm going to really, my dad listens to the podcast. So he said he would do it.
Hi, Dad.
Um, Hi, Paul. We'll try to get him to come. He was in the medical field. I think it would have been all of his friends. I think he would have had a blast just like learning. I think also my mom would have loved sitting with me at your talk and just learning about what you're doing at Rubric and like learning about so many of the cool technologies. My mom is so into technology, and so bringing her and having her just get to go to like the Microsoft booth and just watch all the demonstrations because it was so cool for that audience because again it was so meant for like anybody. It was meant for like the most techie and the least techie, and so I think she would have just loved it. So yeah, I think next year my parents will probably be at HIMSS with me, which I'm pretty stoked about.
Yeah, that's cool. It was definitely a fun conference. If you're in the healthcare space, as I have been for many many years, it's oddly a conference that I hadn't attended until a couple of years ago with a different company. So it was kind of cool to be there with another company and experience it again in a slightly different way. I really enjoy it. I love the healthcare space. When we started to focus on that vertical, my hand was up really, really fast to be focused on that. And I think it's going to be something I'll be able to be at a lot more of those. So any of you listeners that are in the healthcare space or, we really appreciate those of you that started listening because you ran into us at HIMSS. I don't think I hand out nearly as many stickers or had as many conversations, but it
You
was,
were working. It was different. I was there for fun.
yeah, I had to represent somebody else most of the time, but the conversation definitely went there a few times. So we really appreciate you all. We hope these first couple episodes that you've listened to have been useful to you. Some of them have been a little bit of self-reflecting lately. Don't let that dissuade you. Go back and
Everybody
listen to some of the other
loves
stuff.
the privacy reflections episode. I keep getting a lot of that. Was actually the first ones I was
Yeah,
sending to most of our
yeah,
new
those were
friends that
fun.
we met at HIMSS. So they were
Yeah.
very much like, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible!" And then I had a couple people who like I told them about it, and the next day they saw me and they were like, "Oh my gosh, I listened to it. It's
Oh,
incredible.
nice.
Like, keep it up." So that was like the nicest compliment ever.
Yeah,
So
that's really cool.
yeah, so I guess hopefully you'll see us next year again at HIMSS.
Yeah, and that's where I was kind of getting at, was both to thank them and to say, look for us at other conferences like that, particularly myself, because hopefully I'll be at a lot more of those, not just the big ones, but some of the regional ones and whatnot. So
Ooh,
love talking
eventually for the
healthcare.
socializing network that we're setting up, we really need to think about should we do we want to feel comfortable of like releasing the like circuit where we'll be at so that people could come find us.
Yeah, that's dreams at this point. That socializing security gives us the capability to do some of that, but we'll see. We'll see. There's
We'll
stuff
both
brewing
be at a good
already.
amount of conferences this year. I hope we're at a couple together.
Yeah.
Um, but I think either way, it would be really cool for us to have the option to just like be like, hey, come socialize with us. Like, especially like, again, like we do work full-time jobs. So just be mindful of us if we're in the middle of like a work convo. Like, could you like just wait a second just so that who we report to is fine. I work for myself. So like, you're not, for me, that's cool. You can come say hi. I have no issue with that. But I'm regulated differently because I do that for a living.
Yeah, and I'm an introvert. Most people don't believe me when I say that, but feel free to approach me
Which is
and
why he said
start
that
talking to
he
me.
felt awkward about it, but it's fine.
It's a little bit, yeah.
It's fine. I'll
I'm
post a
always,
video on our LinkedIn about. I have an amazing video that I've been holding back until we
oh
recorded this
no,
episode to post of literally me just like cheering for him silently while he's presenting. That I'll post on LinkedIn when we release this episode. It will then just make it land a little bit clearer of like what I mean by being like biggest hype woman. I was getting like I brought some friends with me that I had met at HIMSS to come like watch his demonstration, also to just help fill in the crowd a little bit, and they like loved it. So and then they asked incredible questions. I mean, that's the benefit of bring your friends, right? We know
yes.
how to ask really tough questions to make you just look super good. So
Thank you.
we'll end on that. He's getting
I'll make sure
uncomfortable.
to edit this episode just in case I feel like editing all that out, but we'll see how that goes.
Oh, maybe not.
But definitely want to hear any feedback people have, especially as newer people that are less technology focused in their normal lives. I'm trying to do this more and more. Ask for the feedback. Info at Socializing Security is the best place to provide that, or just reply on LinkedIn. We've gotten a few of those lately that are really cool,
Yes, you're the
including a few
first
of
like
you that have
shout out.
posted, yeah, posted
It's like the best thing
unprepared for.
ever.
Yeah, really appreciate those. So keep those coming, because yeah, we want to make sure we're hitting the right notes with all of you that are listeners already and giving you the content you want. So
And then I
please do give us some
will
feedback.
surprise Brian because he loves
Oh
when I do
no.
this. There is a socializing security signal group. Will be private. It will be by invitation only to make sure we don't get spammers and bots. In it, Brian and I will both be administrators, and then hopefully eventually we have a team. It's literally the two of us right now, but eventually hopefully we'll have moderators and everything in there to help make sure that it's a safe space. That's the intention. Right now it's just me in the group. Brian will be added after this episode, so I've been playing with all of the security settings to making sure that we fine tune it, because I want to make sure it's very clear this is a safe space. It's meant to be a place where maybe you could have a different touch point with Brian and I. Again, we do work full time, so please just be mindful. It might take us a little bit to get back to you, but we also want to just like send out little blurbs about episodes and stuff coming up of what we're talking about. I think could be a really cool way to continue to socialize with you all. So that will be very soon available on our LinkedIn as like a like instead of like subscribe to the newsletter, it's going to be join the socializing network, and it's going to be a signal chat. So I'm announcing that here live. I love when I surprise Brian with stuff like this. But
I knew it was coming at least.
yeah, you knew I was working on it. It was like, you're not invited yet. I'm testing.
I hope to be invited someday, along with all of the rest of you.
Well, after this episode, we'll get a live. I was just messing with our logo and making sure that it looks proper before I tell you.
I love it. I appreciate
but,
that.
You know,
work.
might as well announce it publicly before you're aware of it. So that
Sure,
way
why
you
not?
can't be like, not yet. Too late then.
Everybody learns together, and that is one of our goals with this podcast, is to learn with all of you. So I'm learning with you right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for socializing with us. We appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.